Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Community Connections. I'm Robert Day, CEO here at Patrick Henry Family Services. It's always good to be with you. We're doing something a little different today. We don't have anybody from the community to interview as we usually do and like to do. We're going to take an opportunity to do a presentation, hashtag Make Foster Care Obsolete. We want to just spend some time on this really big vision of how do you make foster care obsolete? Is it doable? Is it possible? What would the strategies be to make that happen? And with me today is our chief mathematician, who's also our chief operations officer, Jeff Nitz. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Mr. Day.
You going to help me stay accountable to the math today?
I'm going to try my best.
I'm going to talk about numbers. Mm-hmm. So just to clarify, these numbers are big estimate numbers. Okay, so
Did you come up with them?
I did. That's why you're here. So if it seemed like just way off, you speak up. That's why you're here today. Hold me accountable. Okay.
Hashtag math is good.
Math is hard, but math is essential. Okay. So what would it take to make foster care obsolete? Well, Jeff, I know you're a bit of a football fan, college football fan. And being the smart guy that you are, you're probably a Tennessee Vols fan, right?
No,
Well, we're going to have to renegotiate your contract then.
apparently so.
Okay. Well, being from Tennessee, I am. My son is a huge Volunteers fan. He bleeds orange. Anyway, we've gone to a few football games in Neyland Stadium. So let's put that up on the screen. So this is Neyland Stadium. It is the sixth largest stadium for college football in the country. Just a little under 102,000 of what it seats. And boy, when you're in there and the place is full and the teams are there and it gets loud and there's just nothing like it, right? So here's what I want us to think about as we talk about foster care and the numbers. So we know that there's anywhere from 400 to 600,000 children in foster care at any given time. The numbers fluctuate. We're having a good year, having a bad year, if there's a backlog, et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. So it would take 6 Neyland stadiums to seat every one of those foster kids at one time. 6 of those. I mean, just think about it. And if you've ever been to a game and saw how big that is, how impressive that is, now think of every seat in that stadium with foster child in it. It's huge, right? Mm-hmm. It's just crazy. Well, we know that every 2 minutes, a new child is going into the stadium. Now, some are exiting, but a new child is going into that stadium every 2 minutes. Now, here's what I want us to look at. Let's bring that back up again real quickly. If you took all the different type cases of abuse, Jeff, so we'll start with the smallest percentage numbers, emotional abuse, less than 2% of all the cases. Child sexual abuse, maybe 7 to 8%. And then physical abuse. At most, you're looking at 20 to 30% of all those cases, okay? So when we think about Child Protective Services and we think about foster care, those are usually the things we're thinking about, isn't it?
That's what comes to mind for folks. Right. Abuse.
Yeah, abuse. Mm-hmm. So the Neyland stadiums, let's put it back on the screen again. All of those cases and if you took all those cases of just those kids, it would fill 1/2 of one stadium. 1/2 of one stadium. So who are the rest of those kids, Jeff? You know the answer to that, don't you?
I do.
And what is it?
That's neglect. Kids neglected.
So all the rest of those kids in 5.5 of those stadiums are there because of neglect. Mm-hmm. That's profound, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. surprises, I think, most community members. They wouldn't know that.
No, they wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
So here's the challenge, right? If you really wanted to make foster care obsolete, what would you focus on?
Probably neglect.
Probably neglect, right? Emotional abuse, very small number. It's one of those things that's difficult to identify and confirm and get a conviction on. It does happen, but it's got to be pretty severe, right? And then the damage to the child is also probably pretty hard. You're going to have some specialized foster parents in there. Sexual abuse, again, pretty clear cut. It either happened or it didn't happen. And then it's actually, at that point, a criminal matter, right? It goes to criminal court.
Right.
So then foster parents are about taking care of this child as this thing goes through a criminal court. Physical abuse, a little harder, right? You could have physical abuse that raises to the level of criminal status,
Good.
but most are not, right?
Very few.
Very few, right? A parent got upset and swung the belt, and the buckle hit an eye, and that's why they're there.
That's right.
Not really criminal intent, but that's why the child is brought into it, right? And in fact, if you, all these things we're talking about, they cross over, right? So neglect, a child may be there for physical abuse, but chances are neglect is part of that case as well, right? So just go ahead.
Share
Yeah,
something?
please.
So when I was a foster care caseworker, I assumed that it would be the kids who were abused physically, sexually, or emotionally that would be the worst off, right? They would just have more struggles. My experience, though, with my kids and my caseload was the kids who were severely neglected or even moderately neglected were the ones who suffered perhaps the most. They had a depressed mom, and mom was not around, or whoever the parent was addicted, and the kids were living on their own. There was nobody to care for them, nobody to care for their heart. And I wouldn't say that for the lesser neglected kids, but the ones that were moderately severely, those kiddos seemed to have the greatest impact on them, and that was a sad thing.
And I don't think people realize that kids die from neglect.
Absolutely.
Right? And then probably there's more kids who die from neglect than actual physical abuse.
Absolutely.
Right? They've been left alone, the 3-year-old. In fact, there was a recent news report out of South Carolina. A couple left their 2-year-old home alone while they went to New York City on a break. A 2-year-old. Wow. They found this 2-year-old taking care of itself.
Wow.
Right? And when asked, the father said, well, we were just a few states away.
Oh.
So we got a real problem. I mean, right? Whitney Houston, we have a problem. Families are, something horrible is happening to families. And the number of kids that are being targeted for abuse, but mostly just neglected, is high.
Yep.
And so then you see this thing, 6 Needham Stadiums. Kids are coming all the time in there.
That's a powerful example right there. Yep.
So bring that up again real quick, Liam. So as those kids are filing in, some are filing out. If I understand the statistics, Jeff, half of those who will enter the stadium, to use their analogy, will never exit the stadium. They're there until they age out or adopted. Make sense? Right? So some are going to go in there, and then they're going to come out. And usually within 12, 18 months. Most of the time, it is not a quick turnover, right? But they will exit. Half of them will never leave until they age out. And of the half that never leave, or the half that that never leave until they age out, those go into 2 different groups, right? There's those who age out without ever having a permanent family, and then there's half of those who get adopted. Okay? And half of those who get adopted will be back into the system because of failed or disrupted adoption.
That's a potent statistic.
It is, right? So you think about the stadium, half of them are there for years. Some of them are going to be able to escape because the family says, I'll take them. And then they go back into it because the family couldn't figure out how to make that happen, right? And then we've got a child with some real trauma issues, don't we?
So how do we fix that?
Thanks for setting that up. Actually, I want to cover a few other slides and get your commentary on it real quick. So let's go to the next slide. Here's actually a graph that shows the number of cases per 1,000 in the U.S. from 1990 to 2017. What do you notice about the graph, Jeff?
It's slowly going down and to the right, which usually means a good thing, except for that top one.
Yes.
That doesn't seem to be going down.
All right. And so do you notice what the ones on the bottom are?
Physical and sexual abuse.
Yeah. So we're actually improving. So some of the myths that we think about foster care, there is a section in which we as a country are improving that. And it's probably the Stop Child Abuse, awareness, those kinds, right? And I also think because they're kind of clear cut. It happened or didn't happen, it goes to a criminal case or not, right? We can solve it. And so we're doing fairly good on that. But what's the one on the top? It's neglect.
Yeah.
And there's been no change, right? We've ended up the same place that we started in 1990, and then you see the huge spikes.
Yeah.
Can you tell something about when neglect cases spike? Can you attach it to any year and remember what happened in some of those years?
I see in 2007, we see physical abuse dipping considerably in that 1 year, but that seemed to be the trend for neglect to start trending up. Interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think that's about, Mr. Day?
Well, in 2008, remember what happened in 2008? The Great Recession.
We had a bad one.
And so you see those neglect cases shoot straight up. And the recession actually started. A recession isn't declared a recession until it's been 3 quarters. So families are already suffering those ahead of time. So I think you can really look at neglect cases and attach it to the economy most of the time. So obviously neglect. If we were really going to make foster care obsolete, we would have to have a strategy that says, let's target the most cases that are these kids that are coming into the stadium. But we got to also remember, as many kids that are in the stadium, there's probably another 10 for everyone that's in the stadium. There's probably, and this is a guess. I don't have any figures on this yet. I'd love to find the figures. But for everyone who's gone into the stadium, there's probably 10 out in the community that's never been identified. Right? Nobody's reported. Or the report happened, somebody went out, said, here's some services, and they never actually entered care. But we call these kids kids on the edge of care. Right? So it seems to me this is where the focus would have to be. We focused on those kids who are potentially going to come into the system because of neglect. The actual ones who go in the system for neglect and those potential ones who are going to neglect. Would that make sense?
It would.
Yeah.
I got some sad news for you then.
Okay.
Based on that chart that we looked at, and given the fact that economic factors play significantly into the numbers and percentages of kids that are neglected, most economists and business leaders are saying we're going to go into a doozy of a recession.
Yes.
In fact, there's already indicators that we are heading that direction. So I wonder what that means for our kiddos in our community, our state.
Right. The economists usually are telling you after the fact that we're in a recession. Poor people, by looking at their Thanksgiving meal, will probably tell you whether or not it's already happened.
Absolutely.
Right? They're the first ones who know it. They'll tell you we're in a recession or we're having huge inflation problems. Yeah. All right, Liam, let's look at some slides. I just want to get some responses from Jeff. So, as we noted, the number one reason kids enter foster care is neglect. So we've got to focus on that. Next slide, please. All these slides are coming from Twitter, right? Because this is hashtag foster care. Did you hear that sound in the background when I introduced it? Hashtag foster care neglect. It was all the millennium settings up to pay attention to what we were getting ready to talk about. So I love this guy. Foster care system is a living and breathing monstrosity of an institution that showcases perfectly how vulnerable and oppressed children are. The education system being a close second. I love what he says. Don't piss me off. That's exactly how I feel about this whole thing. Right? It's shame, right, and it's sadness, but anger is starting really to consume me on this issue. I mean, every one of those, none of those should have happened, and we're talking about 6 stadiums full of kids.
Yeah.
So, next, please. So here's some examples of how bad the foster care system, the system that is supposed to be protecting these kids. I like this. I put this one because I used to work in the Alaska foster care system. I was the CPS worker who was taking those kids, and I averaged 1 child every day I went to work. I took into care and put into foster home. Now we're seeing that a class action lawsuit against the Alaska foster care system by former foster kids. They said, you guys did a bad job, and we're messed up. You owe us.
Because of the system.
Because of the system. I think it's brilliant. And some of the things that they're alleging in this was happening when I was there in the mid-'80s. So it's not changed in all these decades. So good for them. Next. Here's a good example of some of these kids who are entering the stadium never exit because of the abuse that they get in the system. So here, Child Protection failed to respond multiple times that would have prevented a 4-year-old from being killed in foster care. We got to recognize, that's the extreme, but kids are being killed. I used to investigate foster families who were abusing the kids. Some of them I had placed in there, so we know it's a reality.
Yeah.
Next. Here's another one. This judge in Texas is so angry with the system. This is what she says. I can no longer find the Texas Department of Family and Protective Service to be credible in any way. It is shameful. You all, you can tell she's from Texas, all y'all cannot be relied upon for anything, period.
That's a strong statement.
That is, from a judge. That is a very strong. So, next, please. And it doesn't help that this kind of thing happens, right? And that's always been part of my critique of the system, is that it can be used as family policing and as coercion. And so here's a judge who separates a 3-year-old from their family because they wouldn't vaccinate. Now it's more complicated than what it sounds like. But we got to remember that foster care is a state, it's a government entity, like school. So whatever the government wants to do from a policy perspective is going to happen in school and it's going to happen in foster care, period. And so it's ripe for corruption, right? Next.
Misuse at the very least.
Misuse at the very least.
Yeah.
And so we know the kids going in to those stadiums and spending the rest of their childhood in there. When they exit, bad things are happening. Probably the worst thing is 88% of children rescued from sex trafficking was in state custody before they were trafficked. That is an astonishing number, isn't it?
88%.
So if we wanted to end sex trafficking, what do you focus on? Kids going into foster care. And what do we focus on kids going into foster care? Neglect. And it's probably unfair. Tell me if you think I'm right or wrong. It's as bad as foster care is, maybe it's not fair to put all the blame on foster care being what produces that. Right? These kids were coming in already hurt, damaged, needy.
Right.
So.
And the foster care system often did not help those kids. It often did not heal.
Yeah.
either the biological family situation that resulted in the child coming into care, or it certainly didn't heal the harm that had already been done to that child, right?
It would be like putting all the blame on public schools for the outcome of students. They're there to educate, but they're receiving these children already who have been neglected, abused, poverty, et cetera, right? It's a hard thing to overcome for them, okay?
So I have a question for
Yeah,
you, because
sure.
I'm thinking of people who will be listening to this. Are you saying that foster parents are bad news? Are you saying that foster care workers and CPS workers are part of a corrupt, evil system? How would you phrase that?
That's good, and I appreciate. That's why you're here. You're here to hold me accountable. That's your number one job at Patrick County Family Services, and today too. Right. So thank you for reminding me of that. When we talk about a system, sometimes we have to separate the people who are in the system, and there are still a lot of good people in the system. But I think those good people even tell you the system is broken, and all their goodness and their well intention, they're saying there's only so much we can do.
Yeah.
Right? There's good judges, there's good social workers, there's obviously good parents. So we do have to remember that. You can't lump that all together. So thank you for that. Yes, next one, please. So there's already a movement to abolish the foster care system. When we talk about making it foster care obsolete, we thought we were saying something brave. There are abolitionists. There's an foster care abolitionist movement. There's actually an adoption abolitionist movement, right? They want to end adoption. They want to end foster care. And so one of the things that they're starting on is to get rid of mandating reporting, which is really hooked into the caput of the main federal legislation, because they're saying it's causing more harm. If you think of foster care as a policing agency, right, the more reports, the more social workers are going out knocking on doors, poor people, people of color particularly, and kids are being taken. So that's one answer they say. How would you answer that? Being a social worker who grew up saying, I am a mandated reporter, I got to report.
Well, the reality is a lot of times the CPS workers who have to investigate that will take the safest, most conservative route because they don't want it on their conscience. And I understand that if that child got hurt while in care or while they were still with their family members, that's something they're going to feel guilty about. So they'll oftentimes overreact to a situation and take a child and put them in the foster care system. And we've seen how many kids just linger on in that system, and we know it's not best for kids.
Yep.
So that unfortunately just tends to feed that. Again, right intentions, protecting kiddos, but oftentimes poor outcomes.
Yeah. So with increased reporting is increased investigation, which is increased removal, which then is increased bad outcomes. So they think stop the reporting. Well, that's why Alaska's being sued. That's what it was a problem in my day. The official policy is when in doubt, remove. And then you overwhelm a system, and a lot of kiddos get hurt.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, next. So this is really what's motivating the justice side of this, and I think there's a good point, right? 1 in 10 black children will be removed from their homes before they turn 18. So does it need to be abolished? Is foster care a racist institution, right? It's the first time in my time that I've seen it being looked at through the filter of injustice. And I think when you just look at the pure numbers, you can see why people would say that, right?
Tells that story, sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
We need a new system. There's no doubt.
No, we do.
We need a new system.
And so, what do you think that system would look like?
I'm guessing some slides will tell us about
No.
that.
No, not yet.
Okay.
That's another
Okay.
hashtag.
Okay.
Foster care, make foster care obsolete. This is, I wanted to, in a series of these, kind of lay out this, and today is all about trying to get the big picture, and then we can start narrowing in right on what are the answers. But I do think we agree that focusing on neglect, which is largely a poverty issue, and because such a high number of African Americans live in poverty, they then become targeted for this, and they're losing their children one per 10, right? So that's just unacceptable.
That's a profound statistic. 1 out of 10 black children.
Yeah. So I think the answer is less family policing and more family support. It just comes down to that. And family policing is the justice kind of title to that, and I don't always feel comfortable in wearing that title or that skin, but I think there's a real part of that, right? Social services is a family policing institution because it's tied to welfare. And so less of that and more family support. That's how you're going to make it obsolete. But there's usually not money for family support, is it? So that's where we got to go.
Yeah.
So yes, there's one last slide. So here's a different image from the ones that we usually show of the river, right? This quote from Desmond Tutu: "We need to stop just pulling people out of the river. Some of us need to go upstream, find out why they're falling in." And that's what we're trying to do with Vision 30.
That's it.
Right? This one I think is interesting in that it shows this bridge crossing the river, and you see these kids are falling in because of this gap in the bridge. On one side, on the right side of that, it's poverty, abuse, trauma. But on the other side, it talks about systems, broken systems that might be racist, right, or greedy. So thanks, Liam, for that. So
Sometimes it's self-sustaining. We want to, right? Systems long and institutions long to sustain themselves,
Yep.
right? Which federal department is saying, oh, maybe we don't have a need for us anymore.
yeah, they don't.
They just grow and they grow and they grow because they create the reasons for why they exist. Not to say
Exactly.
that there aren't good reasons, but they never get smaller.
No. And I've always thought that one of the reasons foster care is a problem is that it swings, this huge pendulum swings with politics and with money, right? And so whoever's in the White House or whoever's controlling Congress, if they believe this is the answer, that's where the money goes. And then all the services flow that way. And then all these people on that side of the pendulum get left out and hurt and damaged. And then the pendulum swings back to focus on them and these people, right? The bridge goes both ways. We've got to think about systems and people at the same time. So in remaining time we have, I think there's 4 ways that we can look at this. And I would like to hear your, I'm thinking of doing some kind of survey to see where the American people stand on this.
And I'm survey number 1.
Your survey number 1.
All right.
So is foster care impotent, meaning it's not powerful enough, doesn't have enough resources to get the job done? Is that why it's a mess? 2, is it broken? And so if we could fix it with smarter regulations, better qualified people, what is it? Is it just that it's broken? 3, is it corrupt? Is there something corrupt in the system? Something stinks because of money and power in the system? Or 4, is it unjust? That there's a racial component to it. There's a colonialism component to it. There's a patriarchal kind of a component to it. And it's all built into this system, and that's why it's a mess. Which would you say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have a hard time picking up because I think it's all true to a certain degree,
Yeah.
right? What percentage is it for this one of the 4 that you mentioned? I don't know that, but it is a broken system. That probably most resonates with me, and it needs to have full replacement. We've seen videos of people who have run systems in large cities who've said, this is irretrievably broken.
Yep.
It has to be replaced. We have to come up with a better system than what we're doing.
Yep.
I mean, there's not enough foster parents for the number of kids. We see same number of kids, if not growing to year, like you mentioned earlier, that keep coming into that system, 6 picking stadiums full of kids every year, and it's not the same kids.
Yeah,
They kept
right. Yeah.
cycling in and out.
Yep.
So it's a broken system that for which we have to go upstream, right? These kids are being neglected. These kids are being abused, and the system to repair those families that are having some dysfunction and brokenness, we have one hammer, and one hammer
that's right.
is not going to fix, right, the nuanced needs of dysfunctional and hurting families. We have to come up with a better system than what we know is a system that leaves kids oftentimes just as harmed as when they came into that system.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to conclude with this. My opinion is that the system is all those things as you mentioned, and it is almost irretrievably broken. And it's not about putting more resources in that. It's about we've got to reimagine something, and it's one that's upstream, that's more preventable. And that's what we're going to talk about next time we do this. So thank you, folks, for joining Ardo Talk on hashtag Making Foster Care Obsolete. I would love to hear from you. Email me questions, feedbacks, comments, particularly staff if you do that, or if you're not staff and you're seeing this, send me an email. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. And so until next Thursday, Community Connection, God bless. You all stay safe.
Nobody gets to choose their family. If a person is fortunate enough to be born into a healthy family, then life can be much like floating down a smooth, gentle river in the summertime. But an unhealthy family is like a dangerous river, filled with rocks, debris, and fast-moving water. This river swiftly leads to the steep waterfall of adulthood, tragically forming a new river of dysfunction. Even if you aren't born into an unhealthy river, there are many streams that cause a person to get there. But there is only one way to get out, and that is through a meaningful relationship. Across our region, there are many agencies, churches, and families who are devoted to helping children escape from unhealthy rivers. Some feel their role is to wade in and rescue children. They foster, adopt, or provide safe families. Others stand by the river and support the rescuers by providing what they need. Still, others are upstream and stand in the gap to keep children from ending up in the negative situations. At Patrick Henry Family Services, we see ourselves as having an additional role. We are running up and down the shores of the unhealthy river, screaming, "Can't you see the children in the water? You have to do something." Vision 30 is a 10-year initiative. By 2030, we envision a region where all children are safe in their own family, or with caregivers who are supported by a local faith community. So, where do you stand at the river? Are you upstream, keeping families together and strong by standing in the gap? Are you in the river, directly impacting children? Are you on the shore, providing support for the brave folks who have entered the river? Or are you just passing by without noticing? No matter who you are, come down to the river with us. Let us help you find your place. Not only will lives be changed, but you will never be the same.